an announcement was made by the Prime Minister that the elections would be held in 1950 in the month of March. But when Mr. Sukumar Sen took over, he said that the most important part of holding the elections is the electoral roll, and therefore he devoted himself to ensuring the integrity of the electoral roll. And because he was not satisfied, he did not conduct the elections not only in March 1950 but throughout the year. And he spent this time verifying the work which had been done by the Secretariat which was constituted by the Constituent Assembly, and to see it for himself whether the rules which have been prepared meet his satisfaction. So he toured from state to state, etc. It's a long story, but the long and short of it is that the elections were not held in 1950. They were not held even in the beginning of 1951, despite another announcement by the Prime Minister. Eventually, and one of the things which is well known about what he found was that he saw that in many electoral rolls, there were entries made like wife of so-and-so, mother of so-and-so, daughter of so-and-so. So he said a person who does not have the freedom to disclose her identity, how will she exercise her right freely and fairly? So at the cost of annoying a lot of people, he deleted 2.8 million names. And finally, of course, the elections were held in September, October of 1951. They went on for 4 months, and eventually we had the results in April of 52. That was the first elections. And some of you might have read the Indian Express carrying a story, very interesting story about the second elections, when the delimitation had taken place. But the point that I caught from that story is that those elections, because of several compulsions of conducting the presidential poll after the elections, the Chief Election Commissioner and the Election Commission were able to conduct those elections in about 18 or 19 days. So the strength that this process has derived is from people who were institution builders. And if you study the evolution of the Election Commission and the history, you will find that over the period, many people have contributed, and essentially what they have left behind is a system which is driven by standard operating procedures. And these procedures are codified to the last detail. In fact, sometimes those of you who have worked in elections, I see Mr. Tripathi would have worked in the elections. When we were officials in the district working in the elections, we used to feel that does the Election Commission think that we are idiots? We can't understand this simple thing. But then the Election Commission takes care to codify every last detail which needs to be followed. And I think the reason why this system becomes so robust is that this is not only codified, it is drilled into the officials through repeated training. And I often compare the electoral machinery and the procedures that have been codified to some of the most rigid sectors which are driven completely by procedures. I will take the aviation sector, for example. There is nothing that is left to your discretion. You need to follow the letter. If you don't follow the letter, then there is a compromise. So similarly, in the elections, during the conduct of elections, that is precisely how this electoral machinery is able to deliver this huge elections. And I would say that it is able to deliver it quite satisfactorily. There would be aberrations, there would be complaints, there would be grievances. That's fine. But as far as the substantive part of managing the election process is concerned, I think the electoral machinery does a very good job of it, and I can tell you that all those who are involved in elections, they think that this is their test, and this is the touchstone of their integrity, that they must perform this to the best of their abilities and to the satisfaction of the election commission. So that is the history of this entire process. But there are two elements to the whole process. And one is the management part of elections, and the other is the discretionary part of elections, conducting elections. And when I say discretionary part, it pertains to all the decisions which people expect the election commission to take in election after election, during the election, dealing with complaints, dealing with the whole mechanism. And that is where I think there is so much expectation from the election commission that sometimes people feel dissatisfied with the performance of the election commission. And one of the cardinal things that we need to understand and remember is that election commission generally operates within the boundaries of rules, regulations, laws which are laid down. So in a sense, it is like a referee which is discharging the responsibility of conducting the process as per the laid down procedure. But the difficulty arises because the Constitution and Article 324, which was read out, that invests the Election Commission huge authority to take decisions which are in the interest of conductive elections. By the way, the word free and fair is not used in the Constitution. It is presumed that elections will be free and fair. And therefore, the superintendents control conduct of elections, of which the sole authority lies with the Election Commission. The interpretation of the Supreme Court also is that Article 324 is a reservoir of authority. And the Election Commission can dip into that reservoir whenever it feels that it needs to do that. It needs to assert its authority. It needs to take a decision which they think is important for the free and fair conduct of election. And I think it is this dilemma which causes one of the biggest challenges. So we are talking about challenges of general elections 2024. So not only 2024, but generally because of this duality in its character, there are heightened expectations, and everybody thinks that here is the Superman during this period who will deal with all difficulties and who will rise to the expectations of the people. I am not saying that it is not possible to do that, but unfortunately, the way people judge the performance of the Election Commission is in its ability to call out those in power. So it is, nobody is generally looking at the movement of so many men and machines and material and so many other things which are done. That is a given. People think that that is, of course, that is what you are expected to do, so you will do it. Nobody comments on that, and it's fine. I don't think that we need to praise the Election Commission for doing something which is a routine responsibility of the Election Commission. But it is this expectation and the plenipotentiary powers that the Election Commission has, which people expect it to exercise during the elections. Now, I think there are three major challenges. One clearly is the enforcement of the Model Code of Conduct. And as we know that everywhere during the process of elections, the newspapers and everybody is commenting on the violation, perceived or real, of the Model Code of Conduct, and what is the response. of the Election Commission. And the Model Code of Conduct, as is well known, is a document which has been derived after a process of consultation. And it has, principally, it controls, I think, 4 stakeholders. One, of course, the political parties. The other, the candidates who contest the elections. The third is the government. And in the government, there are 2 players. One is the ruling party and the other is the bureaucracy. So these are the 4 principal characters who are supposed to be regulated. Their conduct is supposed to be regulated by this Model Code of Conduct. If you analyze the Model Code of Conduct, you will find that by and large, it contains provisions which are already existing in law. So it's not as if that there is something new which is invented. Of course, there are a few things which are also there which are not part of law. But most of the, or many of the provisions in the Model Code of Conduct are those which are offensive under different laws. So one is that you will not commit these offenses, especially because of their ability or potential to disturb the level playing field and create or vitiate the atmosphere. The second set are restrictions on the government. The government shall not do the following things during the election. And that, again, the spirit behind that is because the government, and when I say government, it includes the ruling party and the permanent civil services, because of their inherent authority to influence people. And that is a restriction which Election Commission expects the parties will observe, the government will observe that restraint, and the Election Commission, of course, is there to enforce all of that. I think the Model Code of Conduct is the biggest challenge. And everybody is discussing that, what about law enforcement agencies? Are they supposed to carry out their activities under the due process of law? Or are they also meant to be restrained because of the elections being in progress? And so far, as I said, because the Model Code of Conduct does not cover the law enforcement agencies or the courts for that matter, Election Commission maintains a very studious approach, very careful approach on how to deal with the action of the law enforcement agencies and the courts for that matter. But the fact is that they do have the power to call out or to scrutinize complaints that they would receive, even pertaining to law enforcement agencies, if the complaint is that it means disturbance of the level playing field. So they do have the authority, but they do have a tradition, they do have a framework within which they operate, and that is what I think is one of the biggest challenges. How do they balance this? The second issue before the Election Commission would be that how do you handle the performance of the media? Because on what is publicity and what is paid news, the distinction is quite blurred nowadays. And whereas there are regulations to control publicity, paid publicity, in the sense that it will go into the account of the candidate who's giving the publicity material, all that is accounted for. But if the media itself decides to publicize somebody or some candidate or some party in a disproportionate manner, what authority can the Election Commission exercise on that media? This is a challenge. Because you do find that during the period of elections, news gets tilted. It is news, but it gets tilted. You do find that even while covering the polling, some of the reporters will report it in a fashion as if it is to influence the voter's mind. So, but how do you draw the distinction between these two? I think that is a challenge. It will become a bigger challenge in times to come because of the nature of publicity. And we all know that production of feature films, which get certification from the censor board, and they get released. There was an instance in 2019 where a biopic was to be released, which was stopped by the Election Commission. But the point is that these are very complex matters, and to expect that Election Commission will find a solution to this, I think is expecting a little too much. Because either you put a blanket ban that during this period, nothing, nobody will release anything of this kind. But then does it compromise or does it suppress the right to expression, the freedom of expression? So those are questions which I think are important for us to understand. And social media is a different kettle of fish altogether. So the extent to which I think Election Commission has succeeded is they entered into a dialogue with the platforms, and these platforms were able to commit themselves to a voluntary code of ethics. And what purpose that achieved was that you could account for the expenditure incurred by various political parties or candidates in using social media. So that is a limited extent to which that voluntary code of ethics was able to achieve. Of course, it also gives the Election Commission authority to direct some of the platforms to take off offensive matter. You've just seen some matter being taken off under protest by X. So that is as far as social media is concerned. And the third thing that I want to touch upon is that maybe more time than was allotted, but the final thing that I want to say is about the expenditure aspect. Now, whereas there are limits to spending by political candidates, the candidates who are contesting, there are limits. These limits are monitored, they are accounted for, and there are expenditure observers in the field. There are committees in the field which are constantly monitoring and reviewing this. And there is also a submission at the end of the election by all the candidates. The parties also submit their annual accounts once in a year. But two issues. One, there is no limit on spending by political parties. So this is an area which Election Commission itself has been recommending to the government that we must put a ceiling. They have even proposed what ceiling there should be on spending by political parties during elections. And the other aspect, of course, is the expenditure incurred which is off the record, which is a matter of conjecture. So nobody knows how much that amount is. It's all speculation. I think ADR tried to put some number to that during the 2019 elections, but then these are numbers which nobody can verify. So I think that during these elections, these three things are a major challenge: the enforcement of the Model Code of Conduct, the regulation of publicity, and the third is how to regulate expenditure. These are the three things, and all the three of them have a bearing on level playing field. Thank you.
Thank you, Lavasa sir, for that overview. Now, just a few questions, and then we'll